What we're going to do in this video is look at how to provide expandable sections on a book page. So perhaps you have too much information to really fit on a single screen, but you still really want it to be just a single screen. This is a good way of doing that. It's also a good way of providing a little bit more interactivity with the book pages, which engages the trainees or users a bit more and makes things a bit more interesting. So this is the finished product, just so you know what we're aiming for. I've got 3 sections, heading 1, 2 and 3, and below each of those, as I expand things down, I've got further information in here. And as I show one heading or one section, the other sections are hidden. Okay, so that's what we're going for. So let's look at how to do that. I'm going to start from effectively a blank page with nothing on it. First thing, I'm going to put in the section headings I'm going to put in there. So here's the first one. Let's see, we'll call this one section heading 1. And I'm leaving the numbers on the end because we're going to take advantage of SAP Enable Now's automatic numbering. So this is section 1. And we'll make that nice and big, maybe 26 points, bold. Okay, so that's our first heading there. We'll make it about that size, looks good. Okay, so I need 3 of these. Oh, the other thing I'll do while we're here is I'm going to insert a vertical guide just so I know where I'm putting things so they all line up nicely. Okay, because as I move things onto the guide, you'll see the guide and it'll snap. So section 1 heading, I'm just going to duplicate this. So copy, Control C, and then Control V a couple of times to paste it. Let's get these 2 sections in there, line them up nicely. Now you'll notice that whereas this one was called section heading 1, this one's called section heading 2, section heading 3. It automatically, if you're creating a new object, if you've got an object of the same type on the page already, it will give it the same name but with a new incremental number. So that works out well for that, and it saves us a little bit of time and keeps things nicely named, which you should always do. Now this text is obviously okay. This text needs changing, so I'm going to change this to this is section 2, and this last one, this is section 3. So that's my headings. Okay, now I want the content to go underneath them. So again, same thing, I'm going to insert some text boxes, and this is going to be underneath section 1, but I'm going to indent it slightly for now because I want to see where things are on the page, and this is going to make that easier. So this first one, I'm going to just put some random text in it. Doesn't really matter too much at the moment. And I'm going to call this one I'm going to call it content 1. Okay. And let's see, I don't want the scroll bars on that either. Okay. So that's my section 1 text. Now I want 3 of these. So I'm going to copy, paste, paste again. And these ones, this is section 2, so that's going to go just under the section 2 heading. Now it all starts to run into each other, so to make that easier to figure out what we're looking at, I'm just going to put this in a different color in here. Let's color this one blue, and I'm also going to make this one slightly longer. Okay, this is going to complicate things for us. If you have them all the same size, it makes things a lot easier, but this way we're going to introduce some additional concepts. So let's get that on there and make sure you can see all of that text. And then my last one, did I name that one? Yep, content 2, this one, content 3. This one's going to go below heading 3. So content 3, that's the same size as the other ones, but this one we will put in green just so we can see that. That's just going to help us be able to see what we're working with. Okay, so now we have our content in there. The next thing I want to do is I want to add some buttons to expand the section and collapse the section. So in there I'm just going to use a triangle as a nice simple button. Obviously that's way too big, so what I need to do is I'm going to take the border off it. It doesn't really need a border on it. It's going to be quite small anyway, because I'm going to make it 16 by 16, which is going to give us a nice small button. And I'm going to put that right there next to section 1. So that's my expand button. I'm also going to want a collapse button. Let's give that a proper name first. So let's call this expand section 1. Okay. Now I want a collapse button as well, which is going to be an arrow pointing down. I could go and insert another shape, but an easier way to do it, to make sure we get one that's exactly the same as this, is I'm just going to copy that, paste it, put it exactly where that one was, and then all I need to do on this is give it a new name of collapse section 1. And then, because I want this to be pointing downwards, I'm just going to rotate it by 90 degrees in here, which is then going to give me my downward pointing arrow. They're both on top of each other at the moment, which is fine. But if I hide the expand button, you can see that the collapse button points down. Hide the collapse button, you can see that the expand points to the right. Okay, so now, first bit of interesting functionality with SAP Enable Now. At any given time, I only want one of these buttons to be displayed. Either I want it to show the expand button or the collapse button. I could achieve that by using hide actions on these things, but an easier way of doing it is I can insert an object visibility control. Now what an object visibility control does is it allows you to select several objects and only have one of those displayed at a time. So as soon as you display one object in that object visibility group, all of the other objects are automatically hidden. In this case, we're only going to have one other button, so it's it's an either-or choice. But this is a great way for providing a bunch of images, and you want one at a time displayed, or you can do it with texts, or you can even do it with groups of information as well. So object visibility is very convenient. And we're going to call this one buttons for section 1. And the objects that's going to have in it is, it's going to have the expand section 1 button, and it's going to have the collapse section 1 button. Now only one of those will be displayed. We'll get round to choosing which one of those it is in a minute. But now I need to do the same thing for my other sections. So I'm going to select both of those, copy, paste, paste. And then move that to section 3, and the other two, make sure I select them both at the same time. I'm going to move those to there. Now you notice the buttons are nicely named because again it's using the automatic numbering. I've now got expand section 2, collapse section 2, expand section 3, collapse section 3. So far so good. So now we've got buttons that we can use. Now because they're in object visibility controls, oh no, I've not got object visibility controls for these two, have I? So let's create another object visibility control for this one, which we're going to call buttons for section 2, and the two objects in that, and we're going to make sure we select them in the same order because it's going to make things easier. Expand section 2, collapse section 2. Okay, the other thing I can do is I can basically copy, paste, and it will create a new one, buttons for section 3, and then I just need to come in here, expand section 3 and collapse section 3. Okay, so far so good. Now again, with an object visibility control, only one of those objects is displayed. So to start with, we need to tell them which of those objects, and I'm going to do that when the page is loaded. So I'm going to select the page itself. I could have selected it down here, but just clicking on the background area here will select it. I'm going to go down to the page loaded, and I am going to say when it's loaded, buttons for section 1 activate 1, buttons for section 2 activate 1, and buttons for section 3 activate 1. So activate 1 will basically say whichever is object 1, that's the one you want to display. So initially this is going to display the 3 expand buttons. And I can check that that works by doing a quick preview, and now you see I've only got those buttons there and it's hidden the other ones. Now for the fun part. Now we need to add in our animations to basically expand these sections or collapse these sections. So as we do this, as we expand section 1, we're going to move down the section 2 heading and the section 3 heading. But we also want to move the buttons as well. So I'm going to have to group these things so I can move them all at the same time. I could move them individually, but then I'd need multiple actions. Grouping them means I can just action that one group. So first thing I'm going to do is, although I don't need to group section 1 to keep things nice and tidy and consistent, I am going to do that. So section 1 and its buttons, you can see down here I've got this is section 1 selected and its 2 buttons. I'm going to go into here and select group. You can see Control G is the shortcut for that. So select that group, and I'm going to call it section 1. Okay, actually I'll call it group section 1 so I know what we're referring to. So far so good. I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm just going to do Control G here, and I'm going to say group section 2, and this last one I'm going to call Control G. I'm going to call group section 3. Okay, so now I have my 3 sections in groups, and I can use animation objects to move those groups. So the first one I'm going to move is the section 2 group. Okay, so let me insert an animation object. Now, when you insert an animation object, it gives you this blue rectangle around there. And this is the finishing point where whatever you apply this to is going to move to, or resize to, because the animation objects can resize things as well as move them. For this, I want this to move section 2. Section 1's always going to be where it is. So I'm going to line it up with the section 2 group. Need to make sure I get that exact, and the width as well. So this is the one I'm going to use to move section 2. Now I've put it directly on the current place where section 2 is. 1, so I can get the sizing right, and 2, I'm going to need an animation object there anyway, because I'm going to need to move section 2 back at some point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this one here, and I'm going to call this move section 2 back, because we're going to move it back to where it started from. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to duplicate this, so I'm going to Control C, Control V, and I'm going to move this to the end of the section 1 texts. Now all these texts are on top of each other, so it's kind of difficult to see, but what I can do is I can just hide content 2 and content 3 for now, and I can see where this one ends. So now I can see that I need that to be pretty much about there. And I'm going to call this one move section 2 down. Okay, so far so good. Now what I haven't done is told it which objects I need that to apply to. So I'm going to select those, and in target object I'm going to say this is the group for section 2. So now this applies to the section 2 group. So effectively what this says is when this animation is triggered, take this target object, group section 2, and move it to wherever this animation object has been placed. Now these also kind of get in the way, but the good thing about this is it doesn't matter what layer they're on, because the layer is controlled by the object itself. So this group, for example, is on layer 7. So if we apply any animation objects to it, it doesn't matter what layer the animation objects are on, because they still have a layer. It's not going to move the object between layers. It's always going to leave them on the original layer, which means I can move these down out of the way of what I'm looking at, so they're not really displayed here because there's no visibility control for them, and now they're hidden and I can't really see them. They're just out of the way. So I now need to do the same thing for section 3. So I'm going to insert myself a new animation control. I'm going to drop this over the section 3 heading, its current position, and basically do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to call this one move section 3 back, and my target object is going to be my group section 3. And then I can duplicate that, Control C, Control V, and this is going to be where section 3 needs to move down to when content 2 is displayed. And this is where we're making things difficult because this section is bigger than the other sections. So I'm going to move that down to about there. That will be clear of it. So this is going to, oh sorry, I moved it, didn't I? This one, move section 3 back 1, which is now actually called move section 3 down. And this is the one that I want to move to about here. Okay, so that one's already assigned to group section 3. So there we're all good. Okay, one last thing that we need to worry about here. Again, I will move those movements down to here. Now, I said that we were going to make things difficult for ourselves, and we have actually done that by making section 2 bigger than section 1, because that means that if I move section 3, the heading, down to clear section 1, it's going to move to here. But if I move section 3 down to clear section 2, it's going to be down here. So it's going to be in a different place in both of those. If these text objects, the content objects, were the same size, it wouldn't matter because I'd be moving it down basically by the same offset. But this means if I expand section 1, I'm going to have to move it to a different area. So what I'm going to do to make things easier here, I'm going to leave section 1 displayed, but I'm going to take the section 2 group and the section 3 group, and I'm going to move those to below section 1. So what I'm going to do is, with those two groups selected, I'm going to group them. I'm just going to do Control G. That's going to give me another group, which I'm going to call section 2 and 3. Okay, so this is both of those. So now I can move both of those together, okay, and to a new place that's not necessarily the place section 2 would move to or section 3 would move to if I moved them individually. So yes, it gets more complicated, but I've deliberately done this because I wanted to point out that you can have groups of groups. Okay, so here I've got a group of section 2 and 3 that contains a group for section 3 and the group for section 2, and those contain individual objects. So you can nest groups to any level you like, and you can still address either this group and it'll affect all of those objects, or a subgroup within it and it'll affect only the objects in that group, or an individual object within a group within a group. You can address things and action them and show and hide them and everything else at any level you need to, which is a great feature of SAP Enable Now. Okay, so now I have my group for section 2 and 3, and I need to basically do the same thing we just did. I'm going to create an animation for that. I'm going to put it right over the existing position of it, which is right about there. And I'm going to call this one move sections 2 and 3 back, same as we did before. Give it a target object of section 2 and 3 because that's the object I want to action on. And now I can copy and paste that, move that to where it needs to be, which is right here. Maybe down slightly. And we will call this one move sections 2 and 3 down. Okay, so now we have all of our animation objects in here. And again, I'll move those out of the way so they're not covering what we're showing. I'm going to re-hide this. So now I've finished doing all of this stuff. So these 3 objects here, I can now realign to where they should be because I don't care what they're hiding. I'm going to put them right to there so they're clear of the buttons and they're directly under the headings. So this is all our content we've got in here. We've got our buttons in here, we've got our headings in here, we've got our content in here, and we have got the animations to move things around. So the final thing we need to do is actually start that animation when we need to. So we're going to do that using triggers. So whenever I expand a section, I want it to hide all of the other sections. Basically what I want to do is whenever someone collapses one section or shows another section, I want it to revert to what you see on the screen now, which is just a single button in here for the expand and the section headings. So I really want to reset everything to the beginning. So I'm going to kind of cheat here a bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a time control, which is typically a timer after certain amounts of different amounts of time. When those time out, it wants to do a particular action. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a single time. I'm going to leave it as 0, 0, which means that this is going to be triggered straight away. Even though I leave it 0, 0, very important, I need to activate it. I need to select this here. Now, when I want to reset everything, I'm going to trigger this. So I'm going to call this reset everything. When I reset everything, I basically want to buttons for section 1, I want to activate 1 again, so I want to show the expand button out of the expand collapse pair. Buttons for section 2, I want to activate 1. Buttons for section 3, I want to activate 1. Then I need to make sure all the sections are moved back to where they should be. So I'm going to move section 2 back, I'm going to move section 3 back, and also I'm going to move sections 2 and 3 back. So regardless of how section 3 was moved back, whether it was moved as a group with section 2 or it was moved on its own, it's still going to move that back. And then I need to hide the content in case that was displayed. So in here, I'm going to say content 1, animate out, content 2, animate out, and content 3, animate out. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff in here, and this is why I've put it in this time control, because when I trigger this time control of reset everything, it will go and perform all of those actions, and that saves me putting it in a bunch of other places. So let's get on to the fun part of actually expanding these sections. So I've got in here expand section 1. What do I want to happen when that button is clicked? Okay, so let me go down to actions. So what do I want to happen when the section 1 expand button is clicked? First thing I want to do in all of these cases, I want to reset everything. That's a little subroutine I just created. So this is going to reset everything to look like this. Then what I want to do is I want to activate button 2 for section 1, which is going to be the collapse button, because that's what I want to be displayed. Then I want to move down sections 2 and 3, and I want to display the content for section 1. Okay, so that all should be good. Next, I'm going to do the same thing for when they click on the expand section 2 button. So let's set the actions up for that. First thing I want to do is reset everything. Then I want to move down section 3. I also want to, buttons for section 2, I need to activate 2 on that as well to show the section button for that. And then I need to show the section 2 content, so animate that in. And then finally for expand section 3, what I'm going to do, as always, I'm going to reset everything. Then I am just going to show the collapse button for section 3, and then I'm going to display the section 3 content. And that's all we need to do on that. There's nothing to move because section 3 is the last one. So that's going to give us all of the moving down and the expands. The collapses, thankfully, are much easier. Whether they click collapse section 1, collapse section 2, or collapse section 3, the thing I want it to do in all of those cases is again use that single subroutine of reset everything. So we've got that used in 6 places, which when it's got 9 things in it, that's why we use it as a subroutine. Okay, so at this point we should have everything good to go. So let's check that and we'll see. I'm going to go to preview. This is what it looks like to start with. Click my expand button, and as if by magic it does that. Expand section 2, and it hides section 1 and shows section 2, and then section 3 does the same thing. And I can do these in any order I want, and it will always work correctly. Okay, it will move things where it needs to. And that's it. That's pretty much all. Oh, actually, there's one more thing. A couple of other things that you can do to tidy things up. You'll notice that when we expand the section, the text comes in before we've actually managed to move this down. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to make some easy changes to this to make things work a bit better. All of our animations, you'll notice they have a duration of 1 second. Now, by default, when we bring this text in, we're just using the default, where is it, content 1, content 2, content 3. When we're bringing these in, we're using the default animation action that's provided for that object. I don't need to provide an animation control for that because it's got its own built-in ones under animation. A fade in, fade out, or I can choose some other ones. But the important thing here is the duration is set to ½ second. So what I'm going to do is set those to 1 second. And for all 3 of those, and now what's going to happen is when we expand a section, the text is going to take as long to come in as it takes for that section to expand. It's still not perfect. The other thing that I could do if I really wanted to make things look super pretty is move things down and then bring in the text. There's a couple of different ways of doing that. Probably the easiest one, and I'm not going to do it now because we've already spent ½ an hour on this. What I could do is where I've got the expand actions for a button, what I could do is move all of these into another time control and actually use that one with timing and have the move section 3 down happen straight away, and then animating content 2 on 1 second. So it'll move the heading down, then it'll animate the text in. So if you want to try that and make things just look a little bit smoother, you can absolutely do that. But for this purpose, I think we're done. So some useful things that we've introduced there. We've had time controls, we've used object visibility, we've used animation, and we've made a book page that's a little bit prettier and a bit nicer than the standard "here's a slab of information." So I hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching. Go try it yourself.